Shabbat Shalom. This week's Parsha, Va'era, is about strength and perseverance, sensitivity and empathy. It's about the strength of God and the power of Moses in taking our people out of slavery, and the sensitivity and empathy that we are commanded to feel towards others who are enslaved in their own way. In this week's Parsha, we read the following: "Say to the Israelite people, I am the Lord. I will free you from under the bondage of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements, and I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God." In the commentary in Etz Chaim, we read these four phrases of redemption: to free, to deliver, to redeem, and to take, are the source for the 4 cups of wine that we use at the Seder. A 5th phrase in this verse, "I will bring you to the land," is the basis for having on the Seder table a 5th cup reserved for Elijah. In thinking about this, we need to look at our lives as a Jewish people in relationship to God and how we relate to others. We have been victims of history. We know that. But today we have power, not only because we have the sovereign state of Israel, but here in the United States we have persevered, and we need to use the strength of our voice and character to be players in a moral issue that is facing our nation and our world. We need to speak out against racism, and we need to come up with reasonable solutions towards issues surrounding immigration. We need to speak out against hatred and fear of the other, because we have been the other one too many times. Why do I bring this up? Because here we are again, slapping our heads, wondering, did the President of the United States really just say that? Did he really just call countries S-holes? I can't even let my kids watch the news with me. Now, some of his supporters will say that it wasn't confirmed, though it wasn't denied the night that it was said, and he denied it yesterday. But here's the problem. All his critics and supporters alike could believe that he said it, could imagine that he said it, and it wasn't like he was caught in a hot mic situation. This was in a room of legislators, of leaders, individuals trying to fulfill the American dream, coming up with bipartisan legislation regarding the fate of DACA. This morning, in reflecting on comments by numerous rabbinic colleagues, as well as a fascinating op-ed by Bush and Kasich, I would like to think about what is the voice, what is the message that we should be saying right now, especially on this Martin Luther King Day weekend. Rabbi Aaron Brusso, a rabbi in Westchester, reflected on this week's latest events by recalling the Mishnah's question, who is strong? One who conquers themselves, Pirkei Avot tells us. So as Rabbi Brusso said, when we misread crudity as honesty and mislabel base talk as being in touch, we are not justifying the action of another, but simply relieving ourselves of the lifelong struggle to be human. When our heroes become those who say out loud what we only dare to say to friends in dark corners, we are not looking for leaders, we are simply wanting to feel less shame. When our fear and ignorance of the other is recast as the virtuous struggle as to be great, we are actually seeking refuge from the embarrassment of our own provincialism. When we talk openly and arrogantly about human beings as excrement, it is really our own stench we are trying to avoid. So we must explore not only this issue of language, but what it represents and what we as a Jewish community must do. For as Rabbi Shai Held commented, lest we mince words or hide behind euphemisms, S-hole countries means places where black people come from. It should come as no surprise that Trump then reportedly said that the United States should bring in more immigrants from countries like Norway. It is hard to fathom the disgrace that he and his supporters have brought upon this country and our people. So what must we do? We must call this out. A few weeks ago, Rabbi David Seth Kirshner penned a piece encouraging people to join the umpire movement, where we veer away from partisanship and call balls and strikes when we see them. The impetus for this movement was the president's decision to formally recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. In light of the president's remarks about people from Africa, Haiti, and El Salvador, and sticking to his theme, Rabbi Kirshner writes, "I call loudly and unambiguously strike for his bigoted, hurtful, and mean sentiments about an entire class of people and many nations. Textbooks call this racism, and I am afraid that history will call this too. And if you support the Jerusalem move because of your faith, that same faith tells us to love the other and to treat our neighbors as we would like to be treated, and to be kind to the stranger, because we must always remember that we were the stranger. We cannot choose one verse to celebrate and then ignore the other." I am hopeful that the president's haters and supporters would join us in calling out these shameful remarks. For as the Talmud explains, silence is assent. And we must link back to our history as we think about the future. In 1924, the U.S. Congress curtailed immigration to the U.S. from that era's S-hole countries like Poland and Russia, trapping millions of Jews in a hostile region where ultimately large percentages of them, of your families, of our families, were slaughtered. The 1924 Immigration Act was, according to the historian of the U.S. State Department, a calculated effort to preserve the ideal of American homogeneity and to keep out immigrants who were seen as undesirable. As Rabbi Rob Scheinberg shared, to put it mildly, it was not America's finest moment. And he says if the president had been alive at that time, he sees no evidence that he would have been on our side of our ancestors and relatives. Just as in the narratives of the Exodus that I spoke about at the beginning of this sermon, when we say, "My father was a wandering Aramean, Arami Oved Avi," we must reach out to the stranger because we too were strangers. We must confront this challenge. And Rabbi Held continued, "This is a bleak time, but we must continue to fight tooth and nail. We must and we will work harder to restore democratic norms, of trying to bring back a sense of decency to public life, of trying to restore and heal a sane conservative party, of examining the utter failure of moral education that led to this presidency." Today, just a few moments ago, we announced the upcoming new month. We said, "May it be your will, God, that this new month brings us goodness and blessing, a long life, a life that is peaceful and blessed with proper sustenance and physical vitality, a life conscious of heaven's demands, wary of sin, a life free of shame and reproach, a life of abundance and honor." The words spoken this week do not bring upon us honor, they bring upon us shame. We cannot and should not accept anything less than that, certainly not from our president. We must call out this hatred and racism when we see it, because this is not even about policy, though policy often comes after it. It is about morality, and our tradition demands that we don't sit back silently. Two Orthodox rabbis, Rabbi John Leaner and Rabbi Avram Lotek, wrote this week in the Jewish Week, as Martin Luther King Day approaches, it is behooving for us to revisit his legacy. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, a Holocaust refugee and close colleague of Dr. King, saw the plight of African Americans in the U.S. as the burning bush of our time. A person, Heschel wrote, cannot be religious and indifferent to other people's suffering. I've spoken this morning about strength, the strength of God, the strength of our people, the strength of using our voice. This week, John Kasich and Jeb Bush wrote an op-ed reminding us of the strength of our country. They wrote, "Immigration has become one of the most polarizing issues of our day, but it is worth remembering that this century opened with a tale of family and migration that was contentious as many of the stories that punctuate our current debate." In the wake of 2001, an earthquake in El Salvador that claimed more than 1,000 lives and destroyed 100,000 homes, the United States allowed hard-hit families to live and work in America. This merciful act was one of many that America has taken to relieve the suffering of a natural disaster in one of the hemisphere's most troubled, impoverished nations. Now, after almost 2 decades, the nation that showed kindness is poised to revoke it and force approximately 200,000 Salvadorans to leave the U.S., even those whose children are American citizens. There are 190,000 American-born children. It is wrong to potentially break up so many families that have for so long made the U.S. their home, legally and at our invitation. If we believe America is made stronger by families, Kasich and Bush say, then let's do everything we can to strengthen the families that call America home. At the very least, the federal government should not become the instrument for attacking them. This is not a partisan issue. This is a moral issue, and so this is what I leave you with. Every Shabbat, we bench Rosh Chodesh. We are affirming that there is hope. Every Shabbat, once a month, we bench Rosh Chodesh. And in so doing, we are affirming that there is hope in the future. This Shabbat, this weekend, we recall King, who taught us to dream that people can be free, that dreams should be realized, that speech should be used to raise people up, not tear people down. So we should strive to speak with care and forethought and dignity and kindness, because that is what our values teach us to do. As the Jewish community reads about Pharaoh and the story of the freedom from slavery, my friend Rabbi Ain Sermon is reminded of a teaching that Pharaoh is an anagram for evil speech, Pei Ra, evil speech, Pharaoh. For his sole objective was to degrade their speech. When Moses the stutterer questioned his own ability to speaking such a way that Pharaoh would actually heed him, he intuited that the essence of redemption was to redeem speech. The battle against corruption of speech is ongoing. Let us remember to care about our speech, to purify and clarify our language. Let us remember to care for one another. Let us remember that the other is not a stranger, for we all were strangers. And let us remember that our words matter and that we should choose them carefully and thoughtfully. And when we hear words and when we see actions that go against the core of who we are, we must speak up. We must say so. We cannot be silent. Shabbat Shalom.